Phil Halesmith and Paul Chiappe from Joelson. Welcome to Brand Growth Heroes. How are you doing today?
Who's going first?
I thought you were.
It's a good start.
It's okay. Either of you can go first. Phil, come on. You're first on my screen. You go first.
Okay, I'll go first. Yeah, we're doing great. Thank you. It's a lovely grey Monday in London.
Well, look, the reason we've got you on the show today is because, first of all, we've got some really exciting news, which is that Joelson is now a sponsor of Brand Growth Heroes podcast. Woohoo! So
Hooray.
Absolutely brilliant to have you on. We thought that it would be fab for our listeners to go through a side of doing business, particularly scaling legendary brands that we don't usually talk about, which is the legal side that comes up as you grow, from setting up your company, setting up your shareholder structure, to looking for investment, to potentially acquiring or selling. And it's something that we don't ever talk about, do we? Well, you probably talk about it every day, but we don't. And you guys have been working together a very long time, and you've been involved with some tremendous food and beverage brands over the years. So I thought maybe we could start by talking about, how did you guys get working together, and what was one of the very first big clients you worked on?
We started working together in '98, which is quite scary, as little baby lawyers. But we started working with one of our flagship clients, which was Innocent, back in 1999.
And you were literally really early days lawyers at this point, were you?
We were, yeah, in our shorts. Pitched to the guys, and we just hit it off right from the beginning, and yeah, managed to stay with them for the whole journey.
And we still work with them today, 26 years later.
Yeah,
that is incredible. What an accolade! And so that's like a really, really long-term relationship. Why did you pitch the guys? Why did they need a lawyer? Why does anyone need a lawyer?
They were doing their first fundraise. I'm sure you've heard the stories. They had trouble getting money back in the day. It wasn't as easy as it is these days. And they had their first investor in the shape of Morris Pinto, and we acted on that first investment. So we were doing the legals to help them get that money in.
This is probably a good time to ask, and maybe it's diving a bit too deep too quickly. Why do you need a lawyer? As a founder, why would I need a lawyer? Can I not just grab some like generic terms sheets off the internet and use those? Why would I bother spending some money on having a lawyer at that point?
Listen, you can clearly go to the internet. You can find all sorts of fantastic contracts on there, but none of them are going to be tailored and bespoke to you as a founder, looking at your business, thinking about what you want to achieve with that business in the future, and then future-proofing it to make sure that you as the founder are protected if circumstances change as you grow. That's why you kind of need a lawyer from a very early stage, really, is to think through what are the things that could go wrong that you need to deal with in the documents that are relevant to you, relevant to your type of business, and relevant to the investors that you're seeking to raise investment from at the time.
And what can go wrong out of interest?
That's a very broad question.
But I'm really interested. I am interested because, it's really easy, isn't it, to think, sure, we'll deal with that when we get there. But why should I spend some money now if I don't think I need to now? What should I be thinking about?
Not sort of talking ourselves out of work, but if what you're doing is very, very straightforward and you're not looking for legal advice, and you want to go to one of these self-serve platforms, then that can work. But in order to use those effectively, there's a certain amount of knowledge that you really ought to have. And I think the issue that a lot of founders are faced with is that it's a sort of presented as if they can just press a few buttons and make it work. But the reality is that they need to know what the impact of those decisions that they're making will have. And that's kind of why, if you've got knowledge, fine. But if you don't, you do need some legal advice that can at least guide you through those early steps.
You were saying before we got on the show that you spent an interesting weekend unpicking some things like that. Talk to us about what kind of things you have to unpick.
Again, this was around choosing a particular right that attach to a share class. So it all sounds a bit technical, but the choice that they made is having a massive impact on the value of their business, on the value of their equity, because they made a wrong decision.
Okay.
And everything can be resolved, but it needs all the other investors to say, okay, we accept that maybe we shouldn't have had this additional super right, but you've got to convince people that they're going to effectively give value back to the founders. So it's that kind of thing that you can make a misstep quite easily that you need to watch out for.
And I think that's one thing that younger founders or founders who are starting out probably don't recognize is the amount of energy and time that senior management gets sucked into with any of these situations, right? Because you have to work on it a lot of hours every week until it's resolved. And that's taking you away from driving sales. It's taking you away from building your team.
Absolutely. It's costly, as you say, in time and money in resolving it.
It's also, I mean, Fiona, just, going back to the original question, it's like there's lots of jargon in consumer goods sort of startups, right? There's lots of legal jargon that people think they understand. And part of our job is sort of translating what you think you understand into what that actually means legally. The great things like you have a co-founder, and part of that co-founder relationship is understanding what happens if you guys fall out.
Yeah.
And that's where you need some advice, because ultimately, you could make a decision today setting up a business that says, oh, well, we'll just keep our shares. But is that right if somebody's left the business? And there's loads of different things that go to the value of your business in the future that you can decide day one in the wrong way if you don't take the right sort of advice and practical sort of advice based on, for us, a combined over 50 years of experience in working with founders and entrepreneurs in this space.
I derailed our original introduction, right, by diving straight into it, which is something that I often do. But I want to go back to this. You've had a relationship with Innocent for, 25 years at this point. That's incredible. So you've seen them through the initial investment with Coca-Cola to full acquisition, I presume. There's other companies that you've worked with or other brands and consumer packaged goods that you've worked with for years and years and years. What are the kind of life quake moments in a founder's journey where they will come to you for the first time?
It will typically be at one of those junctures where there's a big piece of corporate activity that they're going to go through, which is going to need some proper detailed analysis, proper advice, proper structuring. And the key thing is about looking into the future and helping guide the decisions today that will serve them well when that future arrives.
But is that really expensive early doors? So I'm thinking, can I afford whatever lawyers cost these days? Can I afford a huge number of hours for them to pull together this stuff right now?
I mean, it depends. That it is expensive, but it's sort of money well spent, right? Quite often we will get involved at a later point in time. We're very fortunate in that we have great clients who quite often will be very nice and talk about us in the wider community, and that helps or recommend us to other people that they know. We're very privileged and fortunate to be in that situation. But often we'll meet a client who's in the process of doing possibly a sale, and there'll be problems that you have to identify and solve as you're leading up to sell a business, which will cost them a fortune at that point in time, that could well have been solved a lot earlier if they'd come and taken advice at the time. So, the classic things around getting your option scheme right, so your incentives for other people outside of the senior leadership team, or how you build incentives, whether it's long-term incentives or something along those lines. All of those are things that if you spend the time and the effort to start with and get it right, should then work when you come to exit a business. And we see so often that things don't work and you have to actually unpick them and sort of try and remedy them at the time. And that can cost you an absolute fortune and can cost the incentive, the person who you try to incentivize, a lot of money in tax when they come to sell.
Is there, nowadays, it's much more likely that people will have a co-founder than not have a co-founder, or at least they'll be looking for one. Should co-founders be thinking about what happens if one of us wants to leave the business from the very beginning?
Absolutely. I mean, with any joint venture, that's what a sort of co-founder relationship is. You've got to be very clear from the outset as to what each party is bringing to that business. Look at the skill sets, look at the time commitment. I often see founders coming where, one founder might have a full-time job they're still getting the same amount of equity. And you can see immediately that there's an imbalance in that relationship that they either haven't looked at or are ignoring. And eventually that will come home to roost. So I think the key thing is to look at, what are we bringing? What is that future going to bring? What are the things that, if I have to go and look after kids or have to emigrate somewhere, what's going to happen to this business? What happens to my equity? All those questions need to be thought through, discussed, and contractually, you can then just draft those provisions into that contract and set that relationship on a firm footing.
Do you have anything to add to that, Phil? You were nodding.
Yeah, I mean, the co-founder relationship is something that either you set up a business together, there is a commercial discussion around what you're both contributing and what you should be both entitled to as part of the equity. The key thing, and I mean, it sounds depressing, but, lots of co-founder relationships don't survive. When we started working with the guys at Innocent, that was a complete anomaly. The reason they couldn't get funding to start with is they were best friends. There were three of them, and investors didn't really understand that.
Yeah.
Fast forward to today, and one of the key investment principles at Jamjar, who we also do all of their work, is they like to invest in co-founders because they like to see different skill sets on the table. But you've still got to deal with what happens in the future if that relationship doesn't work. And that's part of the weird bit about being a lawyer, is we're thinking positively into the future, but we're also thinking of all of the downside risks. So the mindset is all around anticipating what could go wrong based on historic experience, and maybe being a slight pessimist in that sort of approach.
Yeah, a realist. One of the things I've seen a lot over the last 15 years when I've been mentoring and advising scaling businesses is co-founders coming together. They've got similar interests, similar passions, and although they might be working at the same number of hours a week, it becomes very obvious that one of them has a much greater skill set or different capabilities that are much more appropriate to the business that they're building versus the second one. And that becomes a real source of tension within the relationship. It's not because necessarily someone has moved away or has emigrated or has to go back to full-time work because of salary reasons, but literally they just don't have the same level of capabilities. How do you deal with that then?
Ultimately, it's like any relationship. You're going to have that tough conversation. And from a sort of reward perspective, the things that you have at your disposal are salary and remuneration and equity. And so there needs to be a frank conversation about what ought the split to be, particularly in respect of equity. So you can do equity top ups, or you can do different things, or extra incentivization for the one that is delivering more, let's say.
The moments where that's really, really important is when you have investors coming on board. If it's a sophisticated investor or it's a private equity or something like that, they will often do significant amounts of founder due diligence, right? And founder psychometric tests. And so they will understand what their skill sets are. And it's at that moment that you're saying, well, we're going to give you some investment, but at the same time, we're going to have to rebalance some of those equity discussions. And ultimately, as co-founders, you're going to have to be receptive to that, because otherwise you're not going to get the investment round through.
Ah, interesting. And do you see that often? I mean, have you seen that in the past where one co-founder might have to accept that potentially don't have the same required capabilities to grow the business in the particular sector that they're in as the other one?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what, unfortunately, the sort of journey tends to be that one founder will end up leaving because it's very
Tense.
difficult in that relationship to resolve it and still have a solid relationship. So often what will happen most likely is that one of them will leave. And a lot of what we do is sort of like founder divorce advisory piece, which is to say, okay, this relationship's broken. What are we going to do? How do we get to a fair solution for both of the founders that feels quite fair?
Okay, so this is fascinating. Let's talk about exit then. At what point should founders start thinking about whether or not they want to sell their brand, and when they're going to sell the brand, and what type of company or institution they're going to sell their brand to?
I find it really difficult when founders start and the first conversation is about exit.
What do you find hard about that?
It's sort of too premature. We don't even know if the business is going to survive a year. let alone exit planning. And that's not to say that you shouldn't think about the exit, but there's a time in the journey when it becomes credible to talk about exit. And really that credibility comes typically with revenue. It doesn't need to be about profitability, but you need, particularly in the consumer space, you need to have been able to sell your product, sell your service to enough people so that investors and potential buyers know that you've got a market, right? So that they need to see that. And ultimately the rough test is a revenue play. So once your revenue is at a certain level, you start to become interesting to certain either investor parties or potential buyers.
But does that not go against the idea that it's never too early to think about your end game?
Yeah, but don't lead with that. I mean, it's
Yeah,
I think it's
never lead with that one, exactly.
Explain that, Phil, from your point of view. What do you mean don't lead with that?
So if I meet a founder who's setting up a business and has already told me they're going to sell in 3 years' time, it's questionable as to whether that's the right motivation. Because ultimately, we've been sort of doing this for quite a long period of time. And to set up a business, there's a lot that goes into that. There's a lot of hard work, there's a lot of sacrifices that you need to make. But ultimately, and we all realize, we're in the game where we help founders sell their businesses. So it's part of our business model. But you've got to be realistic as to what those expectations are, especially within consumer. You've got to think about the scale and the speed with which one can actually grow a business and when it's realistic to be thinking about it. That's not to say you shouldn't set it up correctly to start with, right? And think about, oh, if we did exit at some point in the future, we need to think through how that would work. The first thought should be not, this is who I'm going to sell to. The first thought should be, this is how we're going to grow, whether it's by channel, whether it's by, thinking about markets, thinking about segmentation. It's all about actually making the business get to a certain scale where you've got repeat revenue that's significant enough for that to then actually be a proper business that people would be interested in investing in or in acquiring.
Now, another question I have, right? What kind of understanding does a corporate lawyer or commercial lawyer get about food and beverage industry, about consumer packaged goods that the rest of us mightn't get? And why would we be able to get business advice from the commercial law world rather than just legal advice? Can you explain that to me a little bit?
Ultimately, we're here to provide legal advice, but actually that legal advice is sort of irrelevant if you're not putting it into context in what the business is trying to achieve, the power of the customer within the marketplace, understanding the contractual frameworks, thinking about how you make a consumer business, co-packing arrangements, understanding the supply chain, thinking about your sort of cost of goods. All of that in the context of providing legal advice is essential to ensure that we're delivering. How do you actually make a business work in the consumer space from a legal point of view, but understanding the marketplace fully? And having worked with consumer brands for the last 25 years, we have a great understanding of the whole space, whether that's manufacturing, the customer, the supply chain, the branding part of it. And all of that requires some legal input as well as understanding how the parts fit together.
That makes perfect sense. You're not just providing generic legal advice, you're actually providing advice based on how it works in real life in consumer packaged goods, particularly food and bev, having seen so many things happen or not happen or happen wrong or happen right over 25 years. That makes a lot more sense.
Correct.
Paul, do you have anything
Yeah.
to add on to that?
Apart from understanding the context of the business very deeply, as Phil was saying, in terms of consumer piece that I feel that we bring to founders is a sort of alignment in terms of what they want to achieve and the deals that you can negotiate, both commercial deals or with your shareholders, can deliver massively different results. And if you've got someone alongside you as a founder that has your back and knows where you want to get to and is going to be supporting those decisions that you're making, supporting your negotiating stance, you are super powered in terms of facing that, whether it's a shareholder or a customer or a supplier, because you've got someone that has lived and breathed that for decades alongside you, and you're often behind the scenes, so you're not actually going to be visible.
It's like having kryptonite in your pocket.
Exactly. That's what Joelson
Yeah,
is.
yeah, we're
Kryptonite in my
kryptonite.
Kryptonite in your
pocket.
That's
pocket.
it.
Thank you very much. Okay, we
Job
can
done.
finish now.
Job done.
I'm going to get Paul a special T-shirt with kryptonite written on it now.
Yeah, maybe not in your pocket though, just kryptonite. That's pretty cool. Can you give me a little bit of context on that? So, make up a scenario where the fact that you understand, you've been on the journey with the founder or the co-founders, and you
Yeah.
know their negotiating style, and you know what they're looking for in the future. How does that make a difference?
So if we look at shareholder negotiations, so what happens is you've got, let's say, little founder, they want to get the money in, and you've got investors with very deep pockets and a very strong relationship with their lawyers.
What is it about you understanding me and my business that is going to help me then when I'm negotiating?
Let's say we're looking at a fundraise as the sort of topic. The investor, if they're a VC, they're going to have a big law firm that's supporting them that has a single focus, which is to get the best deal for their client. And often what happens is that founders do not have that relationship with their lawyers, or sometimes they don't even use lawyers, God forbid. But what they do need is a rebalancing of that power imbalance. And the way to do that is to have a lawyer, definitely doesn't need to be Joelson, but a lawyer that understands that particular negotiation and how to get the best deal for the founder in terms of equity, in terms of rights. I mean, these pages go on for upwards of 100 pages, these documents.
Is what you're basically saying is that you need to have an equal amount of kick-ass on your side?
Absolutely. And often founders don't do that, and investors will often try and either persuade them not to use lawyers or persuade founders that they can just use, let's call them cheaper law firms. But at the end of the day, if you don't have someone that's been in the trenches day in, day out for a couple of decades, you're going to be disadvantaged.
I think the other thing, in terms of understanding the clients, a lot of it is also explaining to the clients what they're being presented with. So, when you're going to a VC, you'll get presented with a term sheet, and the VC will say, oh, this is our usual terms. But actually, their usual terms are always weighted towards the best possible terms they can get. So we all know there's some flex in negotiations, right? That only happens when you've been in the marketplace and understand what is the standard approach, and then what is possible in terms of that negotiation. Part of what we do is actually helping people understand problems, understand what they don't know, what should be the right thing to do. I think the key is making sure that we're approachable, and we try and do a lot of work to get out into the sector to share our knowledge, share our experience, and make sure that we are seen as approachable, and sort of, I suppose, break down those barriers.
Which is where we first met, of course, at Bread and Jam, which you guys have been stalwarts for very many years, supporting growing founders.
Yeah, we love Jason and Tara and the stuff that they do. We've been working with them for like the last 7 or 8 years, I think. So, that's been great.
They've given so much to the industry. They really have. They've really created a central hub and a heart before Bread and Jam. And even, I suppose, the food hub, the original Facebook page that Bread and Jam was before it became a festival, that was the first place that there was to go to ask questions.
That's the key. When you're choosing a lawyer, you can definitely get plenty of lawyers that will say this is what this contract should say, from the black letter of the law perspective, and identify things for you. But what you need in business is a set of lawyers that are looking at the commercial underpinning of that particular negotiation. What needs to happen? What's the speed of execution? What are they bothered about? What are they not bothered about? And have someone that's able to take a view for you as a founder, rather than just someone that's just amending documents and creating what seems to be a lot of work. You need someone with that sort of commercial focus.
I love that. That is absolutely brilliant. Are the barriers the same for male and female founders?
There's a terrible statistic out there that the female founders only get 2% of the VC investment that's out there. So there's definitely a gender imbalance in terms of how that works. And, we're really kind of committed to highlighting the issues that female founders face in certainly in consumer and trying to work with as many female founders to enable them to actually access that funding and sort of progress and hopefully raise additional capital. We're fortunate to have worked with loads of female founders who've had some very successful businesses, raise huge amounts of capital, and are happy to give back. And that's part of what we're trying to do in terms of running a regular program that supports them both here in the office, but also enabling them to actually access getting VC financing.
Talk to us about Joelson's journey to becoming B Corp. Why did you decide to embark on that journey?
The reason we did it really is all about part of what we want to be able to do is doing business in an ethical and responsible way underpins everything that we do as an organization. So, we want to make sure that, yes, we're a business that makes profit, but we want to be able to make profit as well as make the right decisions that are both sort of from a planetary perspective, but also from an ethical perspective. We need to invest in our employees. The future lawyers at Joelson need to have lots of support. That's part of what B Corp is about. We talked in the previous question around gender imbalance. Part of our ethics is making sure that we're changing the legal sector as an industry, because there are far too many people like Paul and I who run law firms, and we want to make sure that from a gender perspective, from an ethnicity perspective, that the legal profession is representative of actually the society we're trying to serve.
Are there particular moments on the founder journey where founders come to you for the first time? Or I suppose, at what point do founders usually start looking for a law advisor or legal partner?
So when starting out, founders often underestimate the importance of the legal documents, right? They need to think about the legal structure. They need to think about what shares they're issuing, the importance of the relationship between the co-founders. And there are difficult conversations they need to have at that point in time. What happens if somebody leaves the business? And I think from that perspective, it's really important to have a legal advisor that's been there, that understands those conversations, and also has the industry experience to really think through the future of what could happen in the business.
So, besides the fact that you guys are now sponsoring Brand Growth Heroes podcast, you're also a key partner on Brand Growth Heroes mini MBA powered by Elantra, and we are delighted to have you on board alongside Nielsen. Are you excited?
We're very excited.
It's going to be great, isn't it? So
Can't wait.
You're coming on board for the 12 weeks. You're going to be offering one-to-one mentoring. You're going to be coming to our weekly workshops, very much part of the team, and some of your more junior members might even come along on the mini MBA journey with us. So yes, we're really excited, and we're going to get to know each other much better in the future. So thank you so much for joining us.
We're very excited. We can't wait to join you. It's going to be fantastic.
The reason I built the Brand Growth Heroes mini MBA was for my entire 25 years, I wanted a playbook. I wanted to understand, how do you build a rock solid strategy that goes from vision and purpose and what we're trying to achieve, and how that translates into top down 3 to 5 year P&L, all the way through the where to play and how to win, and then how to build your team and how to build your brand and how to build all of your activity plans and your business model and your supply chain in a way that is true to all of those big picture vision, mission, purpose stuff and the 3 year P&L, and how that then translates bottom up from the kind of rate of sale per store, per week, or per channel, whether that's Amazon or whatever it is, and what funding you might need in your cash flow. No one was able to tell me what that playbook looked like. So I've spent zillions of years and hours putting it together and then stress testing it. And we've had, I think it's 120 founders through the program now, 10 recently in its kind of souped up version of the mini MBA powered by Elantra. But before that, we've had 100 founders through the Brand Growth Heroes Accelerator program. And so it's my dream to be partnering with people who have, done the deal between Coke and Innocent, and having Nielsen on board. I cut my teeth on Nielsen data in 1999 at Nestle as a young graduate. So I am super excited about having you guys on board. And I think we're really building something that's going to give a lot of value, I hope, to the early stage scaling CPG brands going forward. So Paul and Phil, it has been wonderful and great fun having you on the show today.
Thank you, Fiona. It's been really great.
Good.
We really enjoyed it and can't wait to get involved next year.
We're looking forward to developing this relationship with you, working with the founders, and hopefully it'll be the start of a long journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Thanks a mil, guys. Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much. Bye-bye.